when you're moving from place to place. Good morning, good morning, morning, good morning.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Tobago Updates Television, and thank you so much for staying with us. We begin the conversation this morning and we speak with Kelvon Morris, Minority Leader of the Tobago House of Assembly. And this morning we're talking about autonomy for Tobago. You might have heard the conversation in the airspace for a couple of months. Now, we've been speaking about it, going back and forth, and we know that at the stage it's at is at the committee level in the Parliament. And so we got to have that discussion, understand what that means, and where do we go from here. Good morning, Mr. Morris, and welcome.
Hi, good morning, Miss Combie. Good morning, all of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and thank you for having me.
Of course, a pleasure indeed to have you, and of course, a pleasure also to have this type of conversation. As you are aware, we have been speaking about autonomy for Tobago for a number of years. We've been back and forth on this topic, and here it is again, and of course, gaining that type of traction. We are at the stage where two bills are at the committee level in the Parliament. A motion was passed, and now we are at the stage where we can make amendments where we see fit and necessary for the benefit of Tobago. So we want to have that conversation, but before we get to where we are in terms of the committee level, we want to talk about the contents, because we know that you passed a motion in the Assembly a couple of weeks ago. We want to talk about that aspect of it before we get into where do we go from here. So let's begin there. What are some of the elements that were part of the motion you proposed?
Sure. So, just for the information of all viewers, during the heat and the middle of the carnival period, the assembly, I took to the assembly what I believe would have been the most important motion out of the 34 motions debated thus far. And that motion was a motion that dealt with specifically the House coming to a bipartisan agreement as to how we treat with these two critical bills that are in front of the Parliament. And it is quite interesting that while most of my colleagues found it important to be present at that very critical debate, notably absent from that debate was our chief secretary. And the chief secretary chose to go to Brazil on an education study tour than to come to the House and debate what he himself defined as the most important issue facing all of Tobago, which is this issue of autonomy. So we, on that Thursday, Carnival Thursday, I would say, went to the House, and the motion was so important that the Leader of Assembly Business requested from me that we meet at an earlier time as to allow all the major members of the Tobago House of Assembly to have an opportunity to have their say. And we debated that motion from 10 a.m. all the way up to 6 p.m. That is to tell you, it is one of the longest debated motions outside of the budget debate that we usually have in June of the legislative period. And so I just want to share with you, we had 3 critical resolutions, and this is the amended version of the motion. So I would have presented a motion which called for a resolution, and my resolution was that this House acknowledge that the provisions of these bills will have a far-reaching and positive impact on the powers of the Tobago House of Assembly, and that the quality of life, for all Tobagonians. I also took a resolution that said that this House unequivocally supports the swift and unhindered passage of these bills into law, recognizing that any further delay would perpetuate the long-standing disenfranchisement of the people of Tobago. And the final resolution was a resolution that said that this House encourages that these bills be passed including an urgent bipartisan meeting between members of the Tobago House of Assembly and members of the Parliament to facilitate their smooth and timely enactment without further amendment. And my colleagues on the majority side amended the motion, and they made two amendments to the motion. They made an amendment in the recital, and I think it was the final recital of the motion where they amended couple words and they added, so, and whereas these bills should represent a historic step forward, proposes substantive improvement to the Tobago's autonomy and authority, including the establishment of the Tobago legislature and the entrenchment of core provisions for Tobago self-governance. So they would have amended in that whereas simply, I would have said these bills represents a historic step forward proposing substantive improvements, and they simply changed the proposing substantive improvement to proposes substantive improvement to the Tobago's autonomy and authority, including establishment. So they made a minor adjustment to that. And the final resolution, so they accepted the first resolution, and I want Tobagonians to listen, because this is what the House, all the members of the Parliament of the Tobago House of Assembly who you elected to represent you, agreed, right? We agreed that first resolution we agreed on is that this House acknowledges that the provisions of these bills being the bills currently before the Parliament that is in the committee stage, should have far-reaching and positive impacts on the powers of the Tobago House of Assembly and the quality of life for all Tobagonians. So just to break it down, what we as the House agreed is in essence that the bills are in fact good bills that would improve the current status of the Tobago House of Assembly and the lives of the average Tobagonian. So that was agreed to by all and sundry, all representatives, and that is a motion that was agreed upon. They also agreed to further resolve that this House unequivocally supports the swift passage of these bills into law, recognizing that any further delay would perpetuate the long-standing disenfranchisement of the people of Tobago. So in other words, the House say pass the bills now. Don't stick, let us get these bills passed. That was also agreed upon without amendment. Where it had an amendment was in the final resolution. And to be quite honest, I, as the mover of the motion, had intended to amend my own motion, because the original motion said without further amendments. And I believed in hindsight that when you are going to a discussion or going to a negotiation, you always have to leave room for amendments. And therefore, we were already going to amend that very last statement that said without amendment. So I will read to you what was actually agreed upon as the final resolution. That this House encourages all necessary actions to ensure the passage of appropriate bills, including an urgent bipartisan meeting between members of the Tobago House of Assembly and members of the Parliament to facilitate their smooth and timely enactment with the necessary amendments. And this is what was agreed upon. So in other words, what the House approved was that all the members of the Assembly, we would do and take actions that would ensure that the bills currently in front of the committee stage of the Parliament is passed by one, encouraging and making sure we have a meeting between the members of the Assembly and the members of parliament. And what this meeting was, what the House envisaged this meeting would be, is that we would sit down together and hear where there are issues, to be, where Tobago believes, or the Tobago House of Assembly believe there are serious amendments needed at certain areas. We'll be able to have the conversations, have the negotiations, and come to a compromise position as to ensure there is agreement amongst the members of parliament, so that we can once and for all have these bills passed, and Tobago can have the kind of autonomy that we would have envisaged from since the days of our great James Bigot, all the way down to A.N.R. Robinson, Ochoy Charles, Orville London, Kelvin Charles, up to this day. And so this is what was agreed upon by the highest authority in the Tobago House of Assembly, the Assembly Legislature. And therefore, Ms. Combie, I must say, I find it quite disrespectful that the Chief Secretary will take a position after being absent from this very critical debate, that he will bypass, he will disregard, and be in contempt of the House by taking on a position where he is now appointing a committee all by himself, maximum leadership, autocratic style, disregarding the approval that we as a House, all members, even his colleagues, sat, debated, and came to an agreement. And he's now disregarding that, putting together his own committee. And the Chief Secretary is so bold-faced to indicate that that committee that he's putting together without the input of no other political organization, no other political entity, he's saying that that committee is apolitical. And I'm asking myself, how does this committee, appointed by a chief secretary, who is doing this without the authority of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature, becomes apolitical? It is a sad day, because we are talking about autonomy for the Tobago House of Assembly. And the chief secretary, no person the less, is blatantly disregarding and disrespecting the very institution he is now seeking to get more autonomy for. So I hope Tobagonians, in a nutshell, have an appreciation for the motion that was brought to the House by the minority before this time. It is quite interesting that before this 34th sitting, notwithstanding all that has been said in this space, no one found it important for us to take to the highest institution in the island this question and this conversation about Tobago autonomy until last October 24th, or so, 25th, I believe, when the minority took this very important motion, which got the entire assembly to agree upon.
Mr. Morris, you said quite a lot there, and of course you
Yes.
gave us the history, and we're now up to date in terms of how everything rolled out. And there are a few things that I wanted to get responses to, right?
Sure.
Especially the last point where you said that to ensure the passage of the meeting with the THA and the Parliament to discuss the way forward. Now you're talking about, of course, the Chief Secretary having another approach. Now that the agreement was passed in the House, the motion was presented, and everybody agreed that this is the way we're going to go. We're going to have a meeting. What is the procedure in terms of arranging, from the executive standpoint? Because now we have to get things done in a particular way that is on the books and that is acceptable in the social space, politically, legally, lawfully. What are the steps to make the arrangement for that meeting where the THA will sit with the Parliament and have the discussion to move the bills forward?
So I just want to say a couple of things with respect to the steps. And the first is that, this question of autonomy does not belong to any one individual, any one political organization in Tobago. It belongs to all the people of Tobago, ultimately, because it is a dream and it is an aspiration of the average Tobagonian to be able to have that level of self-government and self-determination where we govern our own affairs in a way where it is properly resourced, where we can make the laws, etc. So therefore, it is the first call. We are all representatives of the people first and foremost. And before you become a chief secretary or a minority leader, the first thing that happens as a legislator is that you are appointed and you take your oath of office as a representative elected by the people of Tobago. And therefore, any resolution, any authority, the highest authority comes from the assembly. And it is for that reason why even after the forum of political parties headed and led by Mr. London, after they went around to all of Tobago, gathered the views of Tobagonians, and then had the resolutions at Signal Hill Comprehensive School, and those resolutions were placed in the form of bills. It is for that reason why Mr. London did not simply say, I am the chief secretary, I would send this to the prime minister. No, those bills went to the Tobago House of Assembly, which is the authority, the place of authority, and those bills were debated and approved. And it is only when those bills were approved by the Tobago House of Assembly, it was transmitted to the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, and it then went from the Cabinet onto the floor and then forwarded to a GSC, and then it came back as new bills that were rationalized by the GSC. And I say that to say the process, therefore, is a process that always should be led where the legislator is a place where we have the debates and the agreements and the decisions and the ratification. And then, so in terms of steps, now that the legislature, we had the debate, even if the chief secretary wanted to put together a committee as part of the strategy, that should not be a decision made unilaterally by the chief secretary in a bipartisan arrangement. What the chief secretary ought to be doing is come to the House with another motion indicating, as part of his strategy, he now wants to appoint a committee and have the House ratify this committee. And then you now have the authority to also include to the cabinet and the members of parliament. This is what the assembly discussed. This is what the assembly agreed to. And this is a pathway that the assembly is hoping that you will facilitate. And it's up to the members of parliament, led by the chief secretary, putting that position to agree to this meeting, because we are requesting now a meeting. Well, we should be requesting now a meeting, and it is therefore, and I don't see parliamentarians as unreasonable people, for us to sit down, because the PNM has already guaranteed, as currently these bills have the support of the 22 members of the PNM in the lower house and the 12 or so senators, no, I think 16 senators in the upper house. And therefore, the UNC, I think I heard one spokesperson saying whatever Tobago agrees upon, they would support. So it is a good place for us to start. And therefore, if we can bring the parliamentarians together, have the conversation, if the chief secretary believes, because I'm not too sure, the chief secretary is saying there are four non-negotiables, but I'm not too sure how did he arrive at that, because where was the consensus? What is the empirical data to suggest that Tobagonians as a majority, the majority of Tobagonians have decided that there are four things they are not willing to compromise on? But however, if that is the case, let us have the discussions. But you cannot by yourself determine and disregard this most important resolution, and Tobagonians need to stand up, because you see, the first step to dictatorship is autocracy. And when you have somebody operating in this kind of maximum style of leadership, where it is my way or the highway, it is a very dangerous and slippery slope. And we must stop this chief secretary. And I'm calling on Tobagonians to ask the chief secretary to honor the motion that was approved, and let us approach this issue in a bipartisan way that involves the input of all Tobagonians. Because here it is, you are saying that you appointed an apolitical team, but you had no input from even the current political parties, no input from IDA, no input from Unity of the People, no input from PDP, no input from PNM. This here it is, this chief secretary, who was not even appointed in the real sense as a TPP chief secretary, is now taking on this autonomy issue by himself. And you ask, where is the democracy? And it is ironic. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because I've just returned from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association parliamentary conference. And we are there talking about strengthening democracy and allowing the will of the people to have its way and its say. And return to a place where you have a chief secretary who is undermining the democracy and the democratic processes of the Tobago House of Assembly legislature, and that is objectionable, and we should all reject the chief secretary's approach.
Mr. Morris, I understand the frustration. And of course, as I mentioned, I also want the conversation to move speedily ahead. And I'm sitting here and I'm asking myself, is there a time frame, a time span in which that conversation can happen in terms of having the amendment to the bills that are in there? Because, as I mentioned before, this is not the first time we're talking about autonomy. Is there a time frame? This has been at the committee level, let's say a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 4 months before. If we don't have the amendment, then we have to put it down again, or we go ahead with what's here. Is there a specific time frame for that to happen? Because we want to hit the ground running, don't we?
Yeah. So the point is, we know, and as far as I understand, the Prime Minister indicated that as soon as the budget debate is over, these bills will be taken from the committee stage to a final debate and a vote. And therefore, that tells me we don't have much time. And therefore, for the Chief Secretary to go on this process that seems to be very time consuming just does not make sense to me. And this is why, as the process that I envisage and the process I got the House to agree upon is, let the representatives of Tobago from all sides have the discussions with the representatives of Trinidad and Tobago from all sides, and let us have the agreements right there and then, so that when it goes on the floor, everyone will be on the same page, and therefore the opportunity of this failing will be lessened. And that is, I'm sure, even if you don't like Kelvon, you don't like the PNM, I'm sure any reasonable Tobagonian will say this is a very good approach. And therefore, it baffles me that the Chief Secretary will want to derail that process, disregard this process, and go on a process that really sort of starts this discussion all over again. Because I want to caution Tobagonians as well. This process is a process that started since 2007, culminating in resolutions at Signal Hill and the final bills being debated in the Tobago House of Assembly, and that was sent to Trinidad. And those bills represent consensus at the time, and therefore it is basically nonsensical for us to start a new debate, because a new debate means a new process. And while that new process is happening, it means that these bills will lose the opportunity to be passed, because from the time we have heard the debates, anybody who followed those debates in Parliament would understand that once Tobago is not united in its approach, the bills will fail, because you have the PNM already guaranteeing support, as even as the bills are in its current stage, support for those bills. But at the same time, you have the UNC, whose position was simply not to propose amendments, not to add to the debate, but simply to say we are rejecting these bills because some people in Tobago don't want it. And if that remains the mantra of some of my colleagues, that if the bills aren't perfect, or if the bills don't have everything in it that we want, then it is not good. Then the UNC would simply come to Parliament and say, Tobago say the bills aren't good and we're not going to support it, and that would be the end of the conversation. And you know what? We are left with the same Act 40 of 1996 to continue to cry and whine every year that we're not getting enough money. We can't make laws. And I find this such a very sad situation that we are going down, when we can simply come together and look at the bills, because the bills, what the resolution says is that the House accepts that even in its current state, the bills are good. It may not have everything that we want, but it have most things that we need.
And
And
Mr.
that
Maurice,
is
on
what
that
the
note, I want to jump in here on that note, talking
yeah.
about it might not have everything that we need. And we could recall in the recent town meeting that was held by the PNM, the political leader, Ansel Dennis, he mentioned that though the bills aren't perfect, they were enough to trigger the conversation again, right? And I want to ask the question, what are some of the things we hear the Chief Secretary talking about? There are 4 non-negotiables. And we know we have agreed that the bill is not perfect, right? We can agree that. You just said it yourself. You said that there are things that we might not have in the bill, but there are things that we can add. That is why we are at the stage of amendment. Hold on a second. That's why we are at the stage of amendment. In your view, from where you sit, yes, you are in agreement to move these things forward, but having the opportunity to make the amendments and to add, subtract, or multiply to where we are now, what is the one main thing or 2 main things that you would like to contribute to the amendment of the actual bills, as it were?
So I am at the position where I understand a bird in hand is better than 2 in the bush. And I say that because understanding that those who went before us also understood that. And that is why during the days of James Bigot, we were able to have county council, which was not perfect. And then up came A&R Robinson, who advocated along with Dr. Winston Murray, and they pushed for the creation or recreation of the Tobago House of Assembly in 1980. That also was not perfect. Then we had up comes Hochoy Charles, 1996, having the negotiations after A&R, and the same Mr. Robinson after NAR would have negotiated with UNC to become and to form the government, and they were able to push through Act 40 of the amendments of Act 40 of 1996, which we all know still is not perfect. And therefore, we are now faced with another situation where we have 2 bills, which we are again saying we know it is not the final destination. It does not have everything we want in it that says you have the full kind of self-governance that you want. But we know it is, and we accept that it is an advance. It gives us, for me as a Tobagonian, I will take this any day and run with it because it gives us the money that we need. I doubt any Tobagonian would have a problem with us getting almost $4 billion to manage our affairs. I doubt any Tobagonian would have a problem with us having the authority now to legislate over fundamental day-to-day matters that are important to Tobagonians. I doubt any Tobagonian will have a problem with us now having more authority to treat with public service matters, teaching service matters. I doubt any Tobagonian would have a problem with us having the Fiscal Review Commission an independent authority where we can go and have discussions about additional funding. I doubt any Tobagonian would have a problem with us having the ability to borrow without any unreasonable denial from the Minister of Finance, the ability to invest. And I'm saying, when you look at the current complaints of this current administration, the bill addresses all those complaints perfectly. What I hear from this administration, one of the main points I've heard is that, okay, we want the bill to define Tobago as how it defines Trinidad. But in no way in the Constitution defines Trinidad. The Constitution defines Trinidad and Tobago. What this arrangement is allowing for Tobago is really defining the administrative areas to which whatever laws you make in Tobago or policies will impact. And therefore, if you look at the bills that were sent down, we asked for 12 nautical miles and they agreed to 11, which is 5 nautical miles more than what currently exists, because currently in the law, the Tobago House of Assembly law, it is 6 nautical miles. Some people are saying, well, we should draw a line through Trinidad and Tobago. But I am saying, okay, what is the reason why you want the line drawn? And I believe, if we are to be honest, most of us, we know and we believe that there are energy deposits in and around the Tobago space, and we want to be able to have a clear claim to that. So I believe that is where you have this push to draw a line. But if we continue to remain Trinidad and Tobago, I think it's reasonable to believe that whatever is owned by Trinidad and Tobago should be shared amongst the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And if you are already getting a fair share, which is 6.8% or higher, which amounts to almost 4 billion, then arguing about drawing a line becomes a moot point. The reason why you would want that kind of conversation, especially if it is to discuss your contribution, is if you believe your share is not fair. So if we are accepting, and I hope, if we are accepting as Tobagonians, that 6.8% of the national budget is a fair share, which amounts to about 4 billion, then why would we be so consumed in trying to draw a line between the two islands and deny ourselves the other benefits of the self-governance arrangement, which is one of the main things I think as a legislator, and I feel it a lot of the time, is going to the House and not being able to actually put policy into law. What we do, we go there, we debate motions, and those motions we agree upon, but it is not enforceable by law. And it is because the legislature, as it currently exists, does not have lawmaking powers.
Mr.
And therefore, I would simply submit to Tobagonians that, notwithstanding the fact that everyone is admitting that the bills are not perfect, that is undisputable, but it is a definite advancement as agreed to in this resolution that will positively impact the lives of every Tobagonian.
Mr. Morris, if time permitted, we would continue on with this conversation this morning because, of course, we want to get to the end of this situation of autonomy and ensure that Tobago comes out with the best position possible. Even though the bills aren't perfect, there are areas for amendment, and I do hope that the conversation will start in the soonest possible time. We don't want the time to lapse, and we don't have the opportunity.
Well, Tobagonians need to call on the Chief Secretary to respect the resolutions and the approach as agreed to by the House. And that is the first step, because if the Chief Secretary goes down the road where he's going, then the death of these bills will be on his hands.
All right, Mr. Morris, thank you so much for joining us this morning and, of course, bringing us up to date as to where we are, the discussions and the things we need to do to move forward as it relates to the position of the autonomy for Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Mr. Kelvon Morris, Minority Leader of the Tobago House of Assembly, as it relates to autonomy for Tobago. Remember, you can be a part of the conversation. Get in the know, find out what is in the bills and how it can impact the lives of us, all of us here on the island of Tobago. We have to go for a short break before we continue conversations in studio. And as we go for a break, we invite you to help us. Share the live, share the live, share the live. We'll be right back.